They say death is the one thing you can't come back from. But what if I told you about a man who did? Not in a metaphor, not in a dream. Not because someone decided to come back to life after finding a new purpose. I mean dead. 4 days dead. Wrapped in grave clothes, buried in a tomb, his body already beginning to decay in the heat. His sister Martha looks at Jesus and says, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor." His name was Lazarus. But this isn't only Lazarus' story, it's ours. Because all of us have buried something, a dream, a prayer, a relationship, a hope we once carried. Something we eventually stopped talking about because it hurt so much. Something we decided was too far gone. And this story asks a hard question. What happens when Jesus shows up at the funeral late? Welcome to Beyond Belief. Thank you for being here. Maybe you're driving, maybe you're walking the dog, maybe you're folding laundry because it's the first quiet moment you've had all day. Wherever you are, I'm really glad you're here. Today's episode is heavier. We're talking about death. We're talking about resurrection. And we're talking about the parts of our lives we've quietly decided are over. But this is also a story about hope. Not the easy kind, not the everything happens for a reason, not pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I'm talking about the kind of hope that walks into a cemetery 4 days too late and still believes something can happen. Today, we're in John chapter 11, the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. And I'll warn you now, this story might hit you harder than you expect. So settle in. And let me tell you why the story feels so personal to me. A few years ago, I buried something. Not a person. I've buried people too. But this was different. It was a dream, a calling, something I was convinced God had put into my heart. I had a plan. I had prayed about it. I'd even fasted. I'd had those late night conversations with God where you say, "If this is you, then open the door." And for a while, the door did open. Then suddenly, everything stopped. The opportunity disappeared. And I was left standing in front of a closed door, wondering if I'd misunderstood God. I remember the day I finally admitted it was over. I was sitting in my car in the driveway, because apparently that's where we have our most honest conversations with God. I didn't want to go inside. Once I went inside, I'd have to act like I was okay. So I sat there and I said, "God, you were late." And that's what gets me about John 11. Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick and he waits 2 days. He doesn't leave. He doesn't rush. Meanwhile, Lazarus gets worse. His sisters panic. And the situation changes from, "This is bad, but Jesus can fix it," to, "It's too late." By the time Jesus arrives, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days. Martha goes out to meet him, and she doesn't pretend. She says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have been dead." In other words, you were late. You've been there too, haven't you? The prayer that wasn't answered when you needed it, the healings that didn't come, the marriage that ended, the opportunity that disappeared, the person you lost while you were still hoping for a miracle. We all have a Lazarus, something we buried, something we stopped talking about, something we stopped praying about. Because sometimes it's easier to say, "It's gone," than to keep hoping. Martha and Mary both said the same basic thing to Jesus. "If you had been here, he wouldn't have died." But they respond to their grief differently. Martha meets Jesus on the road, still hurting, but she's still trying to understand. She says she knows Lazarus will rise again at the resurrection, and she's holding on to what she knows. Mary is different. When she sees Jesus, she falls at his feet and cries. She doesn't explain her theology. She doesn't try to make sense of it. She's just grieving. And Jesus responds to both of them. To Martha, he says, "I am the resurrection and the life." Then he sees Mary crying. And Jesus deeply moved. John says he was greatly troubled. And that's something important. Jesus isn't standing outside your pain. He's in it. He sees what death has done. He sees what grief has done. And we get those simple words. Jesus wept. Think about that. Jesus knows what's coming. He knows Lazarus is about to walk out of the tomb. So why does he cry? Because knowing the ending doesn't make it less painful. Death still hurts. Loss still hurts. Grief still hurts. Jesus doesn't stand at a distance and tells you to cheer up. He enters the grief with you. He sees your tears. He knows your pain. And he weeps. Picture Bethany, a small village near Jerusalem. Dusty roads, stone buildings, heat hanging in the air, and somewhere nearby, a tomb. Not a grave dug in the ground, a cave cut in the rock, a stone covering the entrance, and Lazarus has been there for 4 days. This isn't a close call anymore. It's over. Martha knows it, and she tells Jesus plainly, there will be an odor. There's no question that Lazarus is dead. No room for a misunderstanding and no easy explanation. Jesus walks to the tomb and he says, "Take away the stone." Martha protests, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for 4 days." And Jesus answers, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" Think about what Jesus is doing. He didn't arrive in time to stop Lazarus from dying. He arrived after the death. That is important. Sometimes we want God to prevent the pain. But sometimes his work begins after the thing we begged him to prevent has already happened. The glory wasn't that Lazarus never died. The glory was that death couldn't keep him. The stone is moved. Jesus looks towards the Father. Then he calls out, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus comes out. But John gives us a detail that I really love. Lazarus comes out still wrapped in grave clothes. He doesn't float out of the tomb. He's not surrounded by golden light. He's wrapped in linen, and he's probably stumbling. He's probably blinking in the sunlight. And then Jesus says, "Unbind him and let him go." I love that. Jesus does the miracle, but he tells other people to help Lazarus finish the journey. Unbind him, help him, walk with him. Sometimes the miracle is dramatic. Sometimes it looks like someone standing beside you saying, "Here, let me help you." So here's the question. What have you buried? What have you given up on? What have you wrapped in grave clothes, put behind a stone and walked away from? Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a calling. Maybe it's part of yourself you thought you'd lost forever. Maybe it's even your faith. Because life got hard, and at some point you stopped expecting anything to change. Maybe you've made peace with it. Like Martha, "I know he'll rise again someday." Sometimes we use religious words to cover wounds that still hurt. But what if Jesus is standing at your tomb? What if he's closer than you think? I want you to remember this. The stone was rolled away so Lazarus could come out, but it also rolled away so someone could see in. The resurrection wasn't just about what happened to Lazarus. It showed us who Jesus is. "I am the resurrection and the life." Jesus is present even when the answer feels late. So ask yourself, what if the thing you've buried isn't as dead as you think? Just picture it. The stone moves, dust rises, light enters the tomb, fresh air rushes into the darkness, and then movement. A hand wrapped in linen, fingers moving, a foot stumbling towards the entrance, and then a face. Lazarus, blinking, breathing, alive. Imagine the people watching. Some are crying, some are shouting, some are on their knees. Some probably can't even understand what they're seeing. And Lazarus is standing there. The man they buried is alive. But here's the part I keep thinking about. Lazarus would die again. He got his life back, but eventually he had to face death again. So what do you do when you've been given your life back? How do you live after seeing something like that? And maybe that's part of the point for us too. I want you to hear the words of Jesus again, not as a verse to memorize, not as something to put on a wall. Hear them as a question. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Not, do you understand everything? Not, do you have all the answers? Not, have you figured God out? Do you believe? Even when you don't understand, even when the timing makes no sense, even when you're standing in front of something you thought was finished. If Jesus can call a man who has been dead for 4 days out of a tomb, what might he do with the places in your life that feel dead? Maybe your marriage feels dead. Maybe your dream feels dead. Maybe it's something inside you died when you were hurt, betrayed, abandoned, or disappointed. Jesus still calls people by name. And he still brings life. I don't know what you're facing right now, but I know this. Jesus may not come when you expect him. He may not answer when you want. He may not stop the thing you begged him to stop, but he is not absent. He is there, even in the tomb. And he's not standing there to shame you for losing hope. He's not telling you that you should have believed harder. He's standing there, weeping, because he loves you, because he sees what you've lost. And then he calls your name. So here's what I take from John 11. First, Jesus wept before he raised Lazarus. He entered the pain before he changed the situation. He is not detached from your grief. He doesn't stand above it and tell you to get over it. He enters it with you. Second, the stone had to be moved. Sometimes we have to face what's behind the stone, and that can be scary. It means being honest. It means letting someone see what you've been hiding. It means admitting you're not okay. Sometimes healing begins when we stop pretending. We need people. We need community. And we weren't made to stay wrapped in grave clothes forever. Lastly, resurrection is more than going backwards. Lazarus didn't get to live forever. Eventually, he died again. But death no longer had the final word. That's the promise of Jesus. Not a pain-free life, not a rewind button, not a promise that nothing will ever break. A promise that death does not get the final word. So here is my challenge. Identify your Lazarus. What have you buried? What have you decided is too late, too broken, too far gone? Now do something that might feel uncomfortable. Move the stone. Talk about it. Pray about it. Tell someone you trust. Let someone into the place you've been protecting. Let them help you. Because sometimes Jesus does the miracle, and sometimes he asks us to help someone walk out of the tomb. And if you've never really encountered Jesus, the Jesus who weeps, the Jesus who waits, the Jesus who walks into impossible places, the Jesus who shows up when hope seems gone, I want you to know this. You don't have to have everything together. You don't have to believe perfectly. You don't have to earn his love. He is calling you because he loves you. And resurrection is what he does. May you know that Jesus is with you in your losses. May you hear him when he calls your name. May he bring life to the places you thought were dead. May the stones you've been afraid to move begin to move. May you find people who will help you when you're struggling. And may you become that person for someone else. May you have the courage to step out of the tomb, to leave the grave clothes behind, and to walk into the life Jesus is calling you towards. And may you remember this: death does not get the final word. Because if Jesus can raise a man who had been dead 4 days, imagine what he can do with your story. Thank you for spending this time with me. I know this episode went into some heavy places, but sometimes we have to face the places we've been avoiding. Sometimes that's where we find Jesus. If this episode meant something to you, share it to someone who needs hope. Someone standing at a tomb right now. Someone wondering if it's too late. And I'd love to hear your story, your Lazarus moment, the thing you've been asking Jesus to bring back to life, the stone you're asking him to move. Until next time, keep believing, keep hoping, and keep looking for Jesus in the places that seem too late. Remember, the stone has already been rolled away. God bless.